Welcome to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. MotorWeek is made possible by Lucas Oil, TireRack.com, and RockAuto.com. Here's your MotorWeek podcast host, John Davis.
Thank you, Alec Webb. Welcome, everyone, to MotorWeek podcast number 273. I am John Davis, and joining me today are Brian Robinson, Greg Carlos, and Jessica Ray. And let's jump right into it. We've got three vehicles we want to talk about, and actually we've got a fourth one, which is just arriving on the scene, and we'll get to that later in the show. And it's something really special for nostalgia fans. But let's start off with the here and now. And the 2022 Volkswagen Golf R, a hot little hatchback. Greg, why don't you take us through it?
Yeah, I'll be the hot little hatchback expert here. We recently tested one at Roebling a few weeks ago, and this is now we're in the Mark 8 generation. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. I think we're up to 8 of the GTI Golf R. So we're talking specifically the Golf R, which is a step above the GTI, which here in America, I think we're just down to the GTI and the Golf R, if I'm not mistaken, or will soon be at the very least. All you need to know is that R essentially means high performance when it comes to the Golf lineup. So it takes the GTI, which is already kind of souped up. The GTI, you get a 288 horsepower turbo 4-cylinder, but when you go up to the R, you get 315 horsepower out of it, 310 pound-feet of torque. And I definitely noticed that torque around the racetrack. It felt pretty torquey, but on the whole, I have to kind of, when I compare the car to, let's say, a Civic Type R, it's not quite as hyper as a Civic Type R. It's not kind of, loud and boy racer-ish like the Type R is. It's a little more subdued, even though I wouldn't consider the Golf R subdued per se, just relatively compared to, the really hot hatch, the Civic Type R. So
would you say it's an alternative though? I mean, after all the GTI kind of began the whole hatchback, hot hatchback thing eons ago, would you say it's an alternative or is it a step down?
No, I'd definitely say it's an alternative. It's a matter of what you prefer. Do you want, something on the street that will really beat you up in the Civic Type R and probably maybe like marginally more capable on the track? Then, Honda's the way to go. I think the Golf R is definitely comparable, just not necessarily a step down, maybe just not quite as high performance as the Type R, but still very, very close. And I think more well-rounded as just a car. But
Brian.
certainly I think the GTI is probably the sweet spot most people are looking for. But if you're really a fan of speed, you like the autocross or even take it on a racetrack like we did, Golf R is probably the way to go. Even though 315 horsepower is not a ton of horsepower, Roebling Road Raceway, a lot of high-speed turns, lower horsepower cars can tend to get lost on those turns. I didn't find that. Robinson, I know we kind of had a deep discussion about this car. We kind of felt opposite at first. I liked it right away. Had a lot of fun in it. Treated it like a momentum car. It does have all-wheel drive, various drive modes, including a drift mode. I'll get to that in a minute. But Robinson, it kind of took you a minute to warm up to it.
Yeah, that's probably the only deep conversation I've ever had with anyone. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. I would echo your comments. It's very smooth and refined, feeling lots of power, feels more European than ever, but it launches like crazy during the acceleration runs and that thing. I wasn't expecting it to launch that hard. And I was really impressed with the trick all-wheel drive setup. I know you were kind of hitting at that. If you want to talk more about that.
Yeah, and to your point about launching, we did have the DSG model, so that's the dual clutch automatic. You can get a manual in it. Basically, there aren't many options you can have with the Golf R. You essentially get it, and it's like the top of the line. But you can choose a 6-speed manual or a 7-speed DSG. We had the DSG, so that's why probably the launch was so exciting, because it was just like a hammer the left brake pedal and then let go and you're off. But yeah, back to the whole all-wheel drive system. You know, I went right to race mode, which, you know, I assumed would be the ideal mode for going around a racetrack. You know, there's comfort, sport, race, special, drift, and individual. It's a lot of drive modes. You just keep hitting buttons until you find the one you like. I thought it would be race. Turned out that it really wouldn't let me get away with a whole lot. Kind of cut power from me, and I just felt like there was more that the car offered that I wasn't getting. And then I threw it into drift mode, thinking that, you know, I didn't have high expectations of it drifting around the track, and it didn't. At least I wasn't able to do it. But that was the mode. That's how I got the most out of the car, which I think because it was distributing more torque to the rear and to each side, I would assume. I mean, I can't sit here and tell you that I felt the power going to each individual rear wheel, but I definitely felt freer, and like I was able to slide it around more and ultimately just throw it into a corner faster. Because again, it's a 315 horsepower car with all-wheel drive. You can feel pretty confident just throwing it around on that specific racetrack, and, you know, not have to worry about it too much.
Yeah, anytime it gives you like a reality check when you choose a mode, it's like, are you sure you want to be in drift mode? And that's definitely the mode you want. Yeah.
Yeah, so don't let it scare you if you're in that. But back to the shift or the transmission, which kind of brings me into the interior. That's been pretty heavily updated, and they've gone toward the whole haptic feedback buttons and sliders, and there's not a whole lot of physical buttons, which I'm not a fan of. But what I am a fan of is the shifter, which it's just like a switch, essentially forward and back. It's actually really simple, easy in operation. I think that's a nice upgrade, but I will say some of the other buttons, like the sunshade, is like a slider. Like you literally, to open the sunshade, you go up to the top where the button would traditionally be, and instead of pushing something, you just like slide your finger back, and it works consistently, but it's a little bit weird for just about everybody who's ever opened a sunshade or a sunroof.
Jessica,
other than that,
any time in it?
I spent a little bit of time in it. I think it looks so good. Like I one of the things I like about the new generation, and I did a lot of like taking pictures of it while it was going like high speed on the track. And that car was probably the one that seemed to look the best in all of my pictures. Like there was something about it, like the lines. I love just like the front fascia where the badging is with like the light bar. Like I think it just looks really, really good.
It's probably because I was driving it so slow. You had plenty of time to get it in focus.
No, that was me, Brian, not you.
But yeah, no, I mean, I took it around the track a couple times. And it was really fun. You definitely couldn't push it probably as much as you know, like Greg had mentioned, but certainly I don't push cars quite as hard as these guys do. But it was really fun. I mean, and like I said, I think it's like a really attractive, and I think the price point too is right around that Type R. So seems to me, I think having more choices is certainly a good thing.
You know,
44 grand, by the way, is roughly the starting price.
It felt so nailed down, to use, you know, all these old cliches. Again, Brian and Greg, you drive a lot faster than I do, but you know, taking around the track, you just felt like you were in a car that was weightier than it is. It wasn't that it felt heavy, but you just felt so darn secure in the thing.
Solid.
Just really solid. I mean, I've always been a golf fan, but talk about evolving and just getting better and better. I mean, you know, they've really done a terrific job.
I definitely would have liked to have tried a manual for obvious reasons, but to the DSG's credit, it felt like it was always in the right gear. And that's just something I feel like car manufacturers are just getting better at with these automatics. I mean, they really tune them so that they know before you do what gear to be in. A lot of them do. So I honestly didn't even use the paddles, which traditionally I have done in automatic cars that had them. This one, I just let it do its thing, and it was fine.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to another vehicle that we had at Roebling. And this is from Cadillac. And Cadillac has been doing something called the Blackwing, a CT4 and a CT5V. And they say the last high performance internal combustion engine sedans they're going to do. And at Roebling, we had the CT5V Blackwing. Brian Robinson, why don't you take the lead on this pretty amazing car?
Absolutely. We talked a little bit about on our driver's choice podcast, certainly deserving of an award for that. It's essentially a sedan version of the most powerful Chevy Camaro you can imagine, but with a much nicer interior and room for more people.
It's a very good way to describe it.
Big power from 6.2 liter V8 supercharged. They build those down in Bowling Green, the Corvette plant, with only the best GM engine builders, and 668 horsepower. That's by far the most powerful Cadillac ever production. Still shy of Hellcat numbers, but Cadillac certainly put a lot more effort into handling department, which we found out at Roebling. It wasn't crazy oversteer city. Car just hunkers down and powers out of corners pretty amazingly. It doesn't even like to do burnouts, even in straight line stuff. It just hooks up and takes off. I was hitting like mid 3 0 to 60s just consistently, 11.7, mid 11 second quarters. You get 6-speed manual or 10-speed auto. 10-speed auto is a couple tenths quicker. We had the manual, which it's all Tremec stuff, same as Chrysler uses in the Hellcats and all. I mean, it's beefy. It's awesome to work. Biggest brakes ever on a Cadillac. They work great. Just felt super solid and capable. If you remember the V8 M3s that everyone hated, it felt like a bigger, nastier version of that. I mean, it's definitely world-class, something Cadillac's been striving for years. I think they nailed it. But, as you mentioned, it's, how much longer is it going to be available?
Yeah.
Not much longer. But if this is the way to say goodbye to gasoline powertrains at Cadillac, I guess awesome way to do it. 85 grand to start. Ours was well over 100 grand with options. But it's definitely something you could take to car shows for years and be the only one there for sure.
We gave our best sports sedan award. We were so impressed with both the Blackwings, both the CT4 and CT5, that we grouped them together for our driver's choice awards. But, when's the last time, and I can't remember, when we might have driven a manual transmission Cadillac?
ATS.
Oh, you're right.
2-liter
Absolutely.
at Roebling.
Oh, yes. So it wasn't that long ago. Good for you.
Yeah, we might have had another V model thrown in there in between, just at home base. But you know what? This car, we always go down with, we had a Lamborghini, a Huracan STO this year, a couple different Porsches. And yet people were still drawn to this Cadillac wherever we went, at the gas station, or if we were at a restaurant, people came up asking about it. And it's a beefy looking vehicle, as in like a lot of horsepower, but I still feel like it's kind of a sleeper. I mean, when you say 668 horsepower, I feel like we kind of glance over that in a 4-door Cadillac. I mean, that is like ridiculous. We were talking about the 2012 Shelby GT500 with 662 horsepower, about 10 years ago. And now we're just throwing around 668 in a sedan. And then you combine it with the fact like it's like anti Hellcat and how it handles on a racetrack, where I'm with Robinson. I assumed, I was babying it the first couple of laps because I assumed it was just going to be spinning the rear end out on me, but like I had to work to get anything out of oversteer wise.
Yeah,
I mean, it's kind of ridiculous, the engineering Cadillac put in this thing.
Jessica, you've been quiet.
It's so funny because obviously when we had it at Roebling, pretty much everybody was singing its praises, and I think for good reason. And then I've talked to some other members of the press, automotive press, who have sort of trickling getting their press vehicles of the CT5-V Blackwings. And pretty much the consensus is all the same, and also one of the things that people just love about it, and I mentioned it in our driver's choice podcast, was like how it sounds. I mean, it just sounds so good. And so one of my favorite things is when somebody gets one of those press cars, is one of the first things they do is they upload a clip of the exhaust and like how it sounds, because it sounds that good. So no, I mean, incredibly impressive vehicle. I think Greg's right. It is a sleeper. I don't think you realize what you had under that hood. And I gotta say, I'm not the world's biggest fan of like styling wise Cadillac sedans kind of recently. I personally don't feel that many of them have aged well, but there's something about these the new like CT4 and the CT5 specifically in their like V series and Blackwing trim that I think will age very well.
They really turn heads. You're
Mhm.
absolutely right about that. That's everywhere you go.
Mhm.
It was kind of the opposite experience when I drove it at the track. I was expecting heavy pushing, and it was none of that. It was like, gosh, what am I in? Because thinking back to the more compact Cadillacs that we've driven, where they just finally got all of the sports sedan aspects right to be able to do it in this big a car. I think it just shows that when GM puts their mind to it, they can really turn out some amazing vehicles. I kind of hope they're going to be able to transfer this kind of know-how into whatever's going to follow in the all-electric arena. Certainly do. Hate to see it gone. We've got one more vehicle we want to talk about before we head down the list of our lightning round, our question, our little surprise at the end, and that's the 2022 Infiniti QX60. Jessica, why don't you take us through the latest from Infiniti?
Sure. I've definitely mentioned it before. I went on the first drive event. I can't even remember when, but yeah, so the Infiniti QX60 is the Infiniti version essentially of the Pathfinder. And so huge updates all around. It's pretty much a home run, I think, for Infiniti. I've already seen quite a few on the road so far. And I know that Infiniti seems to be prioritizing it in their manufacturing because it is exterior wise styling. If you take a look at it, it's less crossover-y and certainly more utility like. It's it's much more boxy than before, kind of following suit with how the new Pathfinder looks. Clearly they're related, but I think that the Infiniti is the more attractive one for sure. Exterior wise, obviously great, but big news in the interior, in the powertrain department, is that same engine, 3.5 liter V6, that has 295 horsepower and 270 pound-feet of torque, but it has the new 9-speed automatic transmission instead of a CVT, which I know will make a lot of people happy. And I also think what it does is it, for a lot of people that no longer who were in that market of this upscale 3-row utility segment, I think people probably for a while, styling wise and powertrain wise, put the QX60 on the back burner. I think now you can take a look at it and be like, all right, wait a second, let me see, that might be an option. Interior wise, also really nice. Because it just seems like it's incredibly simple and
pretty elegant too.
Yeah, pretty elegant. I mean, when I think about it, I think about like something that would be like a direct comparison. And to me, I think like the MDX, the Acura MDX, is sort of like a direct competitor for something like the QX60. And, you know, like I think about how if I was like an absolute touchpad hater and that was a complete deal breaker for me, I like the Infiniti QX60's infotainment, just everything is like really smartly laid out. The touchscreen, I think, was like a perfect size. Everything, like the quality of materials felt really good. So it just seems like Infiniti really thought about this vehicle. And I was incredibly impressed with it. I mean, it's pretty standard powertrain wise. It has enough power. It has enough get up and go for pretty much what anybody who's hauling around probably people are going to need. But yeah, no, I think overall just very impressive from Infiniti.
Brian or Greg?
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. It's a Pathfinder with a better ride, better looks, nicer
Better
leather,
interior.
and it is the same engine, but they get a few more horsepower out of it in the Infiniti, so you're paying more. It's wise that they do that. Yeah, I agree.
I'm looking at this autograph trim QX60, and the seats are just like beautiful. Like they're just really striking me right now. They kind of look like a fresh baseball glove, and in the best way possible.
You know, on that, I was going to bring it up later. I'll bring it up now. We've got a long-term Nissan Pathfinder, and everybody that I've been driving around in it remarks how upscale the interior of it is. And the QX60, the autograph interior is, they've made it really special as well. So it's like Nissan has updated and moved up market both the interiors to a way above what I think we expected or what we found in the last generations. So I agree with you on that. It looks like a really nice place to spend a lot of miles. Don't let me be the last word. I cut you off, Greg. What else?
No, I mean, I was probably just going to keep going on about baseball if you let me.
Okay.
You're like the only one you're the only baseball action going on right now. So
that's what I'm saying. Don't get me started. Let's move
on. They did start spring training. Do you think when you spent time in the QX60 that it's more than just a gilded Pathfinder? Do you think it was tuned differently? Did it ride differently? I mean, we've talked quite a bit about the Pathfinder getting more back to its more rugged roots, and I think its ride is suffered just a little bit in that aspect. Do you think that if somebody hopped between the two of them, they wouldn't think, hey, this is just a different wrapper on the same vehicle?
That's tough.
Yeah.
I'm more inclined to say yes, that it is sort of, because they're so closely related, you know?
They really are.
And that's not a bad thing. Like them being so closely related and it sort of being just different packaging, that's better. I don't think that's necessarily
it's
bad.
I really did think that the ride was tuned substantially different. It was a lot cushier. There was a little bit more roll to it, but I thought if you were looking for a 3-row luxury vehicle, that's what it is.
Yeah. I mean, I also think it just goes to show how like nice cars are now. Like, it's like, how nice can Nissan make the Pathfinder so that Infiniti can still make a QX60?
Right.
You know, like, because I imagine you could probably charge a little bit more of a premium on a Pathfinder, have it tuned exactly the same as a QX60, but you have to make them different because one is supposed to be luxury and one is not. So
otherwise it's the old badge engineering aspect.
Right. Yeah, the gap is, I think, just getting smaller and smaller and smaller every year.
Anybody else? Well, okay, let's move on to our lightning round. And it's all about our kind of old love-hate relationship with Rivian. Rivian is added once again, and they're once again in the hot seat. The upstart EV automaker announced recently that they were raising the price on their R1T pickup pre-orders by $12,000 and $14,000 on the R1S SUV pre-orders. And so this took it from what, 70 up to about 90. After the backlash from the reservation holders, and I say there's also a lawsuit pending, Rivian backtracked the price hike, and their CEO is quoted as saying, "It was wrong and we broke your trust in Rivian." What do you all think about what they did, why they did it? And is this kind of what's going to happen with some of these newer companies? What do you think?
I can't say I'm shocked by any part of this topic. Things are getting more expensive, like literally by the second now. So yeah, I believe that the company would say, hey, we actually need more money than we said you needed to buy our product. And then I totally believe that people who wanted those products were like, well, I don't like that. I wish you wouldn't do that. And, went on social media and started complaining, and rightfully so. And then that same company capitulated and was like, all right, you're right. You win. We'll take it back. But we're going to start losing money.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure which move. They were both business decisions, right? I mean, we all knew that those prices weren't sustainable. They're not Toyota, where they can just take a loss on every Prius they sell for years upon years until they would get a turn on their investment. But hey, they did the right thing, getting bad publicity. And the smart thing would have been just to raise it by $500 every couple of months instead of
like everybody else
12
does.
grand all at once. That's a little extreme.
That is probably the most shocking thing of this whole question, is that like they went from 0 to 100 in no time flat.
Yeah.
Well, I just don't think they think like a traditional auto manufacturer. And I don't think that's necessarily always a bad thing. But I think in this case, it definitely was not the smartest move. Their CEO talking about sort of breaking the trust that people have in Rivian. I think that's really important.
How much trust is there really? They've been around for what, 4 or 5 years? Right.
But that's the thing. Like, they want to be Tesla. They want to have that image, that fan base, people who are just so enamored with the vehicle
that it doesn't matter what they do.
Because if let's say hypothetically Tesla announced or in their configurator that the which they do, this happens actually with Tesla, it's happened quite a few times.
Yeah, let's not pretend
last,
Tesla is a saint of a company.
No. But I'm just saying, we've seen them raise their prices $5,000 and nobody blinks an eye. They're like, oh yes, of course they're raising their prices. They need more money to make more cars or something like that. So I think Rivian was trying to sort of make a move like that, and also maybe get publicity, because guess what? It made the news. Everybody was talking about it. We're talking about it now.
I think I'm a little more cynical. I think they kept the price where they, low to start, to get all the publicity. And once that is subsided, then they basically got back to reality. I agree with Brian. They should have basically inched this up all along, and nobody would have probably cared. But that's a big increase. That's $12,000 and $14,000.
There's people who have had these trucks on order for 4 years.
Yeah.
And so 4 years ago, they're like, oh yeah, I'm fine with putting down $75,000 and buying this truck. And then all of a sudden you say, oh, just kidding. It's now going to cost you much closer to 6 figures than you anticipated.
Right.
that's a difficult thing to wrap your head around, even in the current situation that we're in. Yeah, no, that's people want to see the car. They want to drive the car. They want to experience the car. But
Yeah, our gas prices are going up like 10 cents from the time I pick up the nozzle till I put it in the car. So it's probably it parallels it probably in similar rate hike.
Hey, let's deviate a little bit from what we were talking about. Let me ask you about that. Do you think with these high gas prices, which could last for quite a while, who the heck knows? Is that going to push more people into trying EVs or plugins or anything? Do you have an opinion, anyone?
I think, why wouldn't it? Well, I mean, how could you, if you're in the car market now and you're literally seeing, yeah, I think PHEVs, the plug-in hybrids, are going to be the first things that are on people's mind, probably as they should be. But yeah, I mean, how can you not? Robinson, while he was exaggerating a little bit, as he might or might not do from time to time, he's actually not that far off. I mean, it's literally, and like as we're recording this, overnight has gone up like 8 cents.
Yeah.
So now in Maryland we're pushing almost $4.50 a gallon. So yeah, I think if you were already in the car market and you're experiencing these steep price hikes, you're like, well, maybe a Prius Prime is speaking to me a little bit more.
Or even a regular hybrid,
Yeah.
where you basically see a huge jump in mileage. Brian or Jess?
It's all part of their plan to get us to buy EVs, man. It's been in the works. It's been in the works.
Talk about being
Well, this isn't the first time this has happened. And granted, I wasn't driving when during the first of the price hikes in 2010. But I think a lot about I mean, we were in a pretty bad recession then, to be fair. But cash for clunkers, I think about that a lot. And because my aunt, for cash for clunkers, first thing she bought was a Prius. And she was getting 55 miles a gallon in her little Prius in 2013, while everybody else is paying over $3 a gallon for gas. And back then it was obviously jarring. So I think yes, but it's almost hard to tell because we're still in this weird place with selling cars. It's difficult to get a PHEV. I mean, you want to buy a RAV4 Prime, good luck. It's incredibly difficult. So certainly maybe used hybrids might be more valuable. Anything that's used might be a little bit more valuable than it already is, because everything seems to be, cost wise, everything is up. But well, I mean,
I've heard of at least one dealer in our area overnight slapped $1,000 extra on to every hybrid on their lot. So
I could see that.
there's money to be made. Somebody will make it. For our email question today, or our web question, we're going to go to one that we've gotten a lot lately, and I think we probably should do some explaining. A number of folks have queried us as to why we have stopped doing braking tests as part of our tests. And we haven't stopped, but would anybody like to expand on the answer a little bit?
Well, I can assure you we still do them. As somebody who goes to the track still fairly regularly, every car we do take to the track, we do braking tests. We have all the numbers. We've recorded them. And John, you and Robinson can speak to this a little bit more, but we just don't always have time because we are a television show. We're set to an exact time limit, and sometimes we just don't have time for it. And then when it comes to Roebling, we don't do them.
Oh, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No. I was just saying Roebling, we have traditionally not done
Just because
exact braking numbers.
We're basically down there trying to test 11, 12, 14 cars in 3 days.
Well,
Go
it's
ahead,
not so much a timing issue as we have more relevant, we're on a full track running high speeds. We can talk more about how they're doing on a track versus just straight line stomping on the pedal,
Correct.
which is a lot more interesting. I will say the seeing the braking test mostly started last season when we were doing anniversary show things where we had 30 seconds of every road test was like a flashback to a previous. So we had to cut. So we had 30 seconds less to talk about stuff. And oftentimes it was the braking test that got the sacrifice on that. I haven't really seen it as much this season. I think we're including them. I wouldn't say every time, but most
Pretty
of the time.
close.
Yeah.
Pretty close.
And
It's, go ahead.
I was going to say, it isn't, sometimes it isn't just the braking test. Every now and again, some little tidbit might get cut, like Greg had mentioned, for time. We only have a fixed amount of time. But usually almost always those numbers will end back up on our website. I make it a point to try and make sure that if anything gets cut, a figure like that, fuel economy, we usually don't ever cut like 0 to 60s or something like that. But if anything does get cut, I try to put it back on the website so that that information is available. It's not a conspiracy. We're not hiding anything. It's just a logistics thing.
I think folks know that watch the show that you're putting together a show where you have lots of different segments is a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
And when you get to put all of the pieces together, sometimes one of the pieces doesn't fit, or a couple of them don't, or something pops up that we want to add to, say, motor news that's happened, and we just don't have time for everything. So there's so much good information about all of the vehicles that Brian does such a terrific job of trying to cram into a 5-minute test that sometimes, unfortunately, a few things get left out. But trust us, braking tests are still being done, and we will make sure that whenever possible, they are there front and center.
And most cars stop really, really well now. This is not like retro reviews where you're seeing them lock up and pull to the left. I mean, they're almost like they are to me, the most boring part of my time out there, because they're just so consistent. Nothing ever happens differently, and they all stop, relatively short. So if something is out of the ordinary, we certainly do mention it. But the fact is, cars are so good at stopping now. It's just like they're all fine.
Yeah. And that brings us to what we were saving from the beginning, and that is for nostalgia fans. Anyone basically, you have to be pretty nostalgic. You almost have to be my age to remember the heyday of the Volkswagen microbus. Well, in the words of one of our staff, it has been reincarnated as the Volkswagen ID Buzz, and it's got that ID, so that means it's all electric. The news is out, the photographs are out, some of the specs are out, all electric. Due here probably about a year from now, in Europe a little before that. Is the microbus making a comeback that was worth waiting for? And Brian, as you mentioned off mic, we've been waiting for this for a long time.
Yeah, right after the new Beetle came out in the late 90s, they had pictures of a new van, and we're like, yep, this is going to be next. This is but whatever. We all love the ID4, and this is essentially a much cooler looking version of that with a third row. So what's not to like?
Yeah.
Like that it won't be here until 2024. We're still waiting.
Yeah,
that's the thing not to like.
I mean, we're supposed to get a long wheelbase version. The initial 5-passenger version hits Europe sometime this fall.
I think it looks cool.
It does.
Interior wise, I think is very, very familiar, obviously from what we've seen in the ID4. But it's just one of those things that there's no comparable on the market right now. Nobody else is doing something like this. And
hey, will it be the first all-electric minivan in this country? Probably.
As long as the only other company that's announced that one's coming, I think, is Chrysler.
Yeah.
So I think they said it should be all of Chrysler should be all electric by 2025.
Yeah.
So, and
So
there's
this
two
is probably going to be here
Chryslers.
first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This, I imagine, will be here. Will be here first. Now, I mean, it's cool. It's quirky. I think there's, there's definitely a market for it, and it seems like it is like spacious and could work as a utility, which people want for a bus.
Yeah,
wonder
I mean,
how
they're making
long-
a cargo version of it. So
Yeah. There you go. I wonder how long before somebody will try and do a pop-up camper version of it.
I'm seeing
yeah.
nothing but like Instagram influencers in this thing. I know in a few years my Instagram feed, if I still have it, God help me, will just be loaded with people in ID buzzes wearing clothes from the 60s and doing whatever it is
Flower
influencers
power.
do, influencing people.
Yeah, genius marketing idea for Chrysler. Instead of putting all the effort into making their own, they should just make a version of this and then call it the Rutan.
Ooh. I don't know how many people got that. Good.
Oh,
good,
Robinson.
Yeah,
play,
not to
good
Google
play,
it.
Brian.
Google Volkswagen Rutan, everyone.
Good play. Good play. All right. So ID Buzz, it's buzzing. It's coming. Hey, before we wrap up, anyone got a rant or a rave for this podcast? And they're all thinking, wow, everything right with the world where you are?
Well, I don't think any of us want to say the most obvious thing.
Which is gas prices?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see. Yeah, John, I saw, well, we're testing the XC40 recharge right now. That's our one singular EV, and I saw you called it for the weekend.
I'm going to do, everyone probably knows that Jessica is in charge of all the digital and social media aspects of MotorWeek. And a lot of folks have written in about we don't always run the EVs dry. We basically get a good idea of the range in real world, and that's what we present. But I've pledged that if we, with the updated Volvo XC40 recharge, to do everything I can to run it dry this weekend. So we'll have a real world number that we can basically talk
Just
about.
drive on the highway for a while. That's what I was doing. And it was ticking off pretty quickly. Also, and it's very possible I just didn't spend enough time with it. I could not figure out how to see how many miles were left. All I saw was a battery percentage. I couldn't configure the gauges or go through the screen to figure out. It didn't give me like, you have 200 miles left.
Yeah.
It just said you have 70% or 50% battery, which I found less than ideal.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see that in the central screen or not. I don't remember, since it's been a while since we had one in.
I'm trying to remember when I was in the C40 recharge, because that was the last of the EV Volvos I've been in. And I do remember it being very fixated on like percentages instead of miles. And the dash cluster isn't super configurable. I don't think it's really like customizable that much, from what I can remember. I don't know how much you were playing around with it.
It didn't seem that way. I mean, I don't want to take away from it, because again, I wasn't in it very long and I didn't have a ton of time to sit there and play with it. It didn't feel very intuitive. If there is a way to do it, it was not apparent to me within the first few minutes of sitting down with a car. And I do this a lot, so take that for what it's worth.
The last car that I tried to run down to empty, the last EV, was a Mach-E, and I seem to recall that when it got to 7 miles remaining, it stopped telling you what the where you were. So you just sort of went on faith after that. And I found that very useful, extremely useful. Brian, I cut you off.
Yeah, I have nothing meaningful to add on the Volvo gauge situation, but whoever said we don't take them down to E, I would disagree. I've had quite a few EVs on whatever the virtual equivalent of fumes are. It's just not something we talk about in the road test. Like we don't talk about People not putting gas in them until they're on E.
And that's the real crux of the matter.
That does happen sometimes.
Oh, yeah. More than a few. Well, thanks, everybody. I want to thank our two-wheeling reporter, Brian Robinson, our Over the Edge reporter, Greg Carlos, our digital producer, Jessica Ray, who is also the producer of the podcast, our audio engineer, Jim Bigwood, our podcast creator, Bob Mixter, back at home base. Thanks to all of you. And if you'd like to, if you're new to Motor Week, I don't know where you've been, please go to our website at motorweek.org. You can pull down the tab on the upper right about the show, put in your zip code and find out which public television station in your area is carrying us and the times and days of the week and all that stuff. You can also go over to our cable partner at MAV TV and take a look there at mavtv.com for their scheduling information. Our youtube.com/MotorWeek website is a popular destination. Jessica makes sure that all of our latest features and road tests are up there for everyone to see. We're up on PBS Living. Basically, we're just about everywhere. If you've got a screen, you can find us here at MotorWeek. And all the information is available at motorweek.org. Till next time, for everybody, thanks very much. I am John Davis, and thank you for being a part of MotorWeek.
You've been listening to the podcast of MotorWeek, television's original automotive magazine. MotorWeek is made possible by Lucas Oil, TireRack.com, and RockAuto.com. For additional information on podcasts, videos, and showtimes, visit our website at motorweek.org. And watch MotorWeek, television's longest-running automotive magazine series each week on your local PBS station.